Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. Russian mercenaries in Africa, along with Malian soldiers, have successfully taken control of the strategically located town of Anefis. Recent reports indicate that they are also responsible for drug trafficking in Central African Republic. Now, how strong is the Kremlin's Africa core, and what does its presence mean for the stability of the continent? And to talk about it, we're joined by Jędrzej Czerep, head of the Middle East and Africa program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Good afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
So, what do you make of this latest Russian military success in Africa? Now, how important is this town of Anefis in Mali?
Well, Russia have been facing attacks by jihadis and by Tuareg separatists since April this year. Russians have taken control of the north of the Mali to help Malian government to regain control over the territory where Tuareg separatists are active. That was in 2023. That was a great success for Russians and also for the propaganda of the junta in Mali and for the perception of Russia as an effective military partner in Africa. So that was 3 years ago, and this year Russians and Malians have been attacked by joint forces of the jihadis and of Tuareg separatists in north of Mali. The first round of that was in April, and now we are facing the second round. I feel in early days of July. The isolated garrison of Anefis have been attacked. Russians have withdrawn from some of the key locations in the north of Mali and remained in some isolated garrisons. That was a small garrison town which seemed that was about to fall. The Russians have hold up themselves in a military base, and that was it, without contact to other forces who have been stationed far away, some 200 kilometers south in Gao. So Russians have tried to send a convoy with supplies to those garrisons. One was attacked and returned, but another one succeeded, and eventually it seems like they have regained control over the entire town. So this is a symbolic victory that says that it's not over yet, because many analysts and many observers have foreseen that Russians are losing ground, and it's just a matter of time when we will.
Right, because I'm wondering
see them withdrawing.
What signal does it send to other military juntas of the region? It's not like Mali is alone with internal political problems. It's not the only country that has to deal with Islamic insurgents. Therefore, I'm wondering whether the Africa Corps, formerly known as the Wagner Group, is gaining popularity among certain African leaders.
Well, it does gain some popularity as a security provider. It sells a security package for dictators in a number of countries, or for ambitious junta leaders who would like to position themselves or paint themselves as anti-colonial revolutionaries. That was the case in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Later, a similar security package have been sold, dispatched to Equatorial Guinea, which is ruled by an aging dictator who just wants to secure a transition of power within his family. Then, in recent 2 years, Russian soldiers also popped up in Madagascar, where there was a military coup, and another soldier who thinks of himself as a revolutionary won power. Also some trainings for government troops in Congo, Brazzaville, and possibly in Togo have been reported. So this footprint is still expanding. It's surprising, because we might have believed that with troubles on the Ukrainian front, Russians would be less tempted to expand their footprint in distant locations, and sub-Saharan Africa doesn't seem like a top priority if we think of it. But it is a much more of a priority for Russia than we might believe. After
so why is it so important to the Kremlin?
After full-scale invasion on Ukraine, A bulk of Russian diplomats in Europe have been redirected to Africa, and on the list of priorities, geographical priorities, Africa rose. Well, as Russia is isolated in the global north with Western powers, it seeks more presence in the global south. This particular triangle between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger also serves as a political project which says that, well, which is a proof of the Russian narrative of a multipolar world emerging. So these groupings which broke away from the regional bloc in the West Africa, the ECOWAS, formed its own bloc, which has an anti-Western, pro-Russian agenda, and is trying to attract new countries to join this bloc. So there is no big economic reward coming for Russians from Mali particularly. There is gold.
So it's not about money now. It's a rather a long-term project.
It is a long-term project, and Russians are pouring in military supplies quite spectacularly. There have been at least 4 major sea supplies, ships have been coming from Kaliningrad Strip, crossing Baltic Sea close to Polish shores, and going down to Guinea-Conakry in West Africa, and then traveling overland 1,000 kilometers into Mali and Bamako with all kinds of different military hardware, which we may think Russians would need in Ukraine, but they are still eager and ready to send on to Mali to support their friends, the junta of Mali, because it's so important politically.
Now, I'd like to ask you about, because if it's not about money, they have to finance themselves somehow, and I'd like to ask you about this drug trafficking scandal. Apparently, a person with a very familiar surname, Prigozhin, is involved in it. Pavel Prigozhin, the son of the late Yevgeny. What are the sources of Africa Corps financing in Africa? Is it just drugs, or is it, gold mining?
It's basically government contracts, because the governments pay for them to be there. But it's also, there are also Russian companies which operate on the ground in concert with Africa Corps. It's like a diamond company, Alrosa, which is present in West Africa. It's a gold company, Norgold, which is also present in Burkina Faso, for example. The Central African Republic, which you asked for, is a different case, because Central African Republic is still an old Wagner relic. It's the structures that Prigozhin built there and which developed its own economic empire and its own economic network over years is largely intact, and they continue with Wagner legacy. They continue with Wagner, folklore, and they continue to refer to Prigozhin as their leader. Pavel Prigozhin was in the process, after Prigozhin's death, in the process of taking over former assets that have been built by Prigozhin. Pavel was thought of as a person who would potentially could take some Wagner loyalists on board, some people for whom the name Prigozhin means much. There wasn't much certain information about actual role of Pavel Prigozhin. Initially, it was believed that he wasn't really much respected by the former Wagner commanders. There are other people on the ground who spent years working on cultivating ties to the local political elite in Central African Republic, building economic empire, which is timber, which is bottled water, which is beer. There is a corridor coming from export and import corridor from the port of Douala in Cameroon overland into Central African Republic. So coffee, that was an idea in Russia that we struggle because of sanctions. There is not enough coffee, so let's grow our own coffee in Central African Republic. So apparently they continue to diversify their economic portfolio and went into illicit sector as well.
Lastly, I'd like to ask you about the scale of this phenomenon. I mean, for the last few years, Russia's army in Ukraine has been somewhat, aided by African volunteers, right? What was the scale of this phenomenon at this particular moment? Because I know that some of them were willing to rather go back home than to enlist, for more years of fighting in Ukraine.
It's something between 1,500 and 4,000-5,000. That's the rough estimate of a number of Africans who are enlisted and who fight on behalf of Russians in Ukraine against Ukrainian forces. Well, there are two stories. One is there are schemes of fake jobs into which some Africans are being lured, promised another job in Russia, a safe job, and then eventually end up in hands of officers who push them onto the front lines. But there's also an open recruitment into Russian army, and there are multiple cases in many countries in Africa where you could easily identify adverts which say, go for military contracts, join, here are conditions, here are the benefits. Those who are captured by Ukrainians, they always tell that, well, we have been tricked, we didn't know where we go, we are just here by accident. But I have no idea what is the real proportion between those who go there willingly and knowingly to fight, and those who are actually being tricked. My intuition is that there is actually more of mercenaries than tricked laborers.
Jędrzej Czerep, head of the Middle East and Africa program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, was our guest this afternoon. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews here on TVP World.